Hey, St. Patrick's. Great to be with you on this Tuesday, February 6th, for this week's video from Father Pete. I want to talk about two things this week. One is I first want to review again our missional planning process. I want to remind you that on February 18, that's a week from this coming Sunday, we will have our annual parish meeting. And at that meeting, we'll do two things. We will roll out the plan that the Missional Planning Committee came up with during our planning weekend a week and a half ago, and we'll tell the story of the process. We'll talk about our focus for the next year, and invite more of us to participate in implementing that plan. So it's going to be a great time for us as a parish. And secondly, we will vote for new vestry members at the annual parish meeting. How that's going to work, just so you know, is we will go through our worship service and get through the prayer of Christian discipleship. Then we'll stop and we'll spend about 30 or so minutes in our parish meeting. Then we'll close that with a blessing and the dismissal. So it'll be built into our liturgy. And we'll probably streamline the regular worship just a bit. So we'll probably still be done with everything well before noon, so we have time to break down and put stuff away and be out in time for lunch. So that's going to be a great meeting. Please plan on being there that Sunday so you can hear what's going on with our missional planning process and be part of, if you remember, part of voting for our new vestry for this next year. Second thing I want to mention is, so for some of you, you're familiar with the idea of the four practices. If you're newer, maybe you haven't heard us talk about that a lot, but if you read at the bottom of our weekly handout, we always have our mission statement: making disciples through worship, community, formation, and mission. Those four things, worship, community, formation, and mission, we call the four practices, and we think of it as the shape of Christian discipleship. And so worship is how we love God, community is how we love God's church, mission is how we love God's world, and then formation is right in the middle of that. That's the heart of it, where we cooperate with the Holy Spirit to become the kind of people who can love God, love God's church, and love God's world. The four practices. And they really give shape to our life as disciples. In our past history as a church, we have actually used those four practices and distributed a packet to guide people through creating what's called a rule of life. Now, a rule of life is sort of a plan for spiritual growth. It's kind of like a trellis that you put maybe a morning glory or a vine type bush on, so it doesn't just lay on the ground. It can have a structure to grow on. Rule of life is kind of like that. And during Lent, we're going to roll out a new version of the four practices planning packet and create a space during our Lenten season for all of us to work on developing a rule of life for ourselves around these four practices. You'll hear more about this, but this is actually kind of an outflow of our missional planning time and a way to create alignment for us as we grow as disciples together, and a way to help us be intentional, very intentional about our spiritual development, these four key areas of worship, community, formation, and mission. So be watching for that. That'll actually be handed on the 18th as well. So those two things, remember that on February 18, Sunday, we have our annual all-parish meeting, and we'll talk about our missional planning weekend, and we'll elect vestry. And then during our worship, we're going to introduce or reintroduce really the four practices as a framework for building a rule of life, and create or introduce a path for us to do that during Lenten season together. So be encouraged with that. I'm encouraged, and look forward to seeing you on Sunday on Last Epiphany as we think about the transfiguration of Jesus. God bless. Have a great week.